He sold ice cream from a pushcart on a hot Queen's afternoon, and somewhere between the coins and the complaints, he discovered a skill far more valuable than the product he carried: the ability to sell a feeling. That feeling would bloom into a promise: wealth, reinvention, escape, and then metastasize into a machine that converted small savings into shattered lives. This is the story of Jordan Belfort. From neighborhood hustler to the architect of a boiler room empire to a prison memoir turned Hollywood spectacle. The truth is as simple as it is shocking, and by the end of this video, you'll see exactly how charm, pressure, and weak oversight turned fraud into entertainment. If you want short, clear breakdowns like this, hit subscribe. Jordan Belfort grew up in Bayside, Queens, the kind of place where ambition felt urgent and compromise felt comfortable. Early jobs, selling Italian ices, working odd shifts, taught him two things: how to read people, and that the sale itself could be the product. He enrolled in dental school but dropped out. The tooth he was meant to fix wasn't people's smiles, it was their desire for a better life. A short-lived door-to-door meat business failed. But failure wasn't a defeat so much as a lesson in closing: how to recover after a door slams, how to make the next pitch land. Those small hustles distilled into a belief that success came from persuasion, not from an inherently valuable product. That belief was portable. He took it to Manhattan and to Wall Street, where luck and timing nudged him into the right doorway. A job at a brokerage, L.F. Rothschild, gave him an entree to markets he barely understood, but more importantly, it exposed him to the commission calculus of selling securities. Then came Black Monday, a brutal market crash that cost many their jobs, including Belfort's. Fired and hungry, he saw opportunity where others saw ruin. Penny stocks, cheap, often illiquid shares traded outside the mainstream, were a revelation. The commissions were enormous relative to the price of each share. Imagine being paid a large fee for convincing a stranger to buy a product they barely understand. Multiply that by hundreds of calls a day, and you see why the model was intoxicating. Belfort partnered with Danny Porish, and in the late 1980s and early 1990s founded Stratton Oakmont. It began as a brokerage, but it quickly became something else: a high-pressure sales operation, built to manufacture confidence and move shares. Stratton Oakmont was, by design, a recruitment engine for hungry closers. The office atmosphere was electric, almost tribal. Scripts and routines, most famously the straight-line persuasion technique, trained brokers to steer conversations relentlessly toward one aim: the close. The pitch mattered less than the cadence, the urgency, the sense that the listener was about to miss out on a unique opportunity. New recruits were taught to read voice tones, to escalate scarcity, to mirror and push. In practice, this translated to non-stop cold calling, a chorus of ringing phones, and a culture that prized aggression over due diligence. It was not a firm built on research, it was a firm built on momentum. What followed was not merely aggressive selling. Stratton specialized in a classic scheme known in financial circles as a pump and dump. Think of it like hyping a house so that dozens of buyers rush to bid way over list price, allowing the seller to slip away with the cash before the market corrects. In stock terms, the firm would take an obscure or newly public share, create a frenzy of buying through scripted calls and manufactured publicity, drive the price up, and then the insiders would sell their holdings at the peak. When the artificial demand evaporated, the price collapsed and ordinary investors were left holding worthless paper. The targets were often ordinary people: teachers, war veterans, families that had remortgaged homes, who heard a convincing voice over the phone promising a quick gain. One teacher's life savings could be turned into a brief spike in a ticker, then into a loss that took years to recover from. A veteran, trusting and conservative, could be persuaded to buy at a temporary high, erasing a pension cushion. These are archetypes, but they reflect documented patterns. The victims were not wealthy insiders. They were regular people who trusted the system and trusted the salesperson on the other end of the line. Structurally, the firm hid its wealth the way any criminal enterprise does, through layers and distance. Offshore accounts, shell corporations, and complex transfers were used to shield proceeds from scrutiny. Couriers and third parties moved funds across borders. The story that makes headlines, the yacht, the Ferraris, the parties, was enabled by a quieter infrastructure, accounts in Switzerland and elsewhere, legal jurisdictions that made tracing money slow and costly. That said, the investigators did find traces. A critical moment in the official case was a roughly $2 million wire transfer to Switzerland that could be traced and, importantly, was recorded in a way that linked the movement of funds to the inner circle. That traced and recorded wire became one of the evidentiary threads investigators pulled to unravel the web. The office culture itself fed both the fraud and the illusion. Drugs, lavish parties, and toys of excess, yachts, luxury cars, private jets were not decorative extras. They were tools of loyalty and recruitment. Excess told recruits a simple story. Working here pays glamour. It also normalized risky behavior and created an inner reality where the usual ethical breaks were dulled. Loyalty to leadership, a mythology of invincibility, and a reward structure that celebrated wins above all else turned caution into cowardice and oversight into performance theater. Investigators began to notice the pattern. The SEC and the FBI collected complaints and followed accounts. Whistleblowers inside the operation, brokers who felt betrayed or cornered, agreed to cooperate, some even wearing wires to record incriminating conversations. The FBI's Gregory Coleman led a methodical probe, one that relied on assembling recorded calls, tracing funds through international corridors, and orchestrating raids and subpoenas. Small inconsistencies in ledgers, mismatched paperwork, and testimony from former employees built a mosaic of wrongdoing. The recorded $2 million wire to Switzerland, traced through banking channels and linked to payments for personal expenses and offshore entities, provided a tangible line investigators could follow. When the empire collapsed, it did so with the inevitability of a machine run until parts overheated. Raids and indictments followed. Hundreds of brokers faced charges or censure. The firm itself was exposed as a corporate facade masking systematic deception. Belfort eventually agreed to cooperate with authorities. He wore a wire in recorded meetings. His cooperation was part of a negotiated resolution that led to indictments of several colleagues. In the end, Belfort was sentenced to 22 months in a minimum security facility. Public records show a court-ordered restitution figure of $110 million. It is also reported that only a fraction of that ordered restitution has ever been recovered by victims. The precise amount recovered is complex and spread over time, but the gap between judgment and full compensation remained a grim truth. Prison did not ultimately erase the story. While incarcerated, Belfort met the comedian Tommy Chong, an encounter that, according to Belfort's account, encouraged him to write. He wrote a memoir, an unvarnished, self-conscious account of excess, success, and ruin, which later became the basis for a major film adaptation. Martin Scorsese directed the movie, and Leonardo DiCaprio starred as Belfort, turning the trials and crimes of a financial con into one of Hollywood's most talked-about spectacles. The book and film catapulted the narrative from court records to cultural folklore, transforming a criminal saga into a pop-cultural product that many consumed as entertainment. That transformation raises a moral and cultural puzzle. How did a story about large-scale fraud become, for many, a rags-to-riches adrenaline rush? The film's style, fast edits, gleaming visuals, charismatic acting, made it easy to admire the surface. Wit, audacity, the intoxicating image of easy money. Yet the victims' stories, teachers who lost life savings, veterans who saw their nest eggs evaporate, families forced to remortgage homes, often live off-screen. Court orders like the $110 million restitution figure are stark reminders that harm was real and quantifiable, even if media attention favored the spectacle. There is another uncomfortable truth. Charm is persuasive. When a person demonstrates magnetic confidence, an entire system can bend around that charisma. Investors, regulators, and even peers are susceptible if the performance is convincing enough. This susceptibility is not merely the failure of individuals. It is a feature of a cultural environment that admires winners and material success, sometimes regardless of the cost. Weak regulatory oversight in parts of the market at the time, a lack of financial literacy among ordinary investors, and a media environment hungry for stories that glitter all combined to create fertile soil for a narrative of fraud to flourish. It is also worth noting what the story did not become. The revelation and prosecution did lead to reforms, enforcement actions, and a deeper public conversation about market abuses. Many brokers and executives faced consequences, yet the conversion of scandal into currency, book deals, speaking fees, media appearances, shows how messy accountability can be. A convicted operator can pivot into profit-making narratives about resilience and lessons learned, selling access to the very salesmanship that once facilitated abuse. That raises honest questions about second acts and where the line should be drawn between rehabilitation and reward. For victims, the afterlife of the crime is often longer than any headline cycle. A teacher who lost life savings may spend a decade rebuilding finances. A veteran might miss opportunities for retirement security that never fully return. Public records show restitution orders, but recovery is partial and slow. The human cost, measured in disrupted lives and deferred retirements, is not easily converted into courtroom sums or cinematic sequences. When the cameras stop rolling, the losses remain. So what is the simplified, shocking truth? It is this: a combination of superior salesmanship, weak market safeguards, manufactured hype, and an enabling culture of excess allowed a small group to turn persuasive skill into widespread harm. The mechanics, cold calls, scripts, offshore accounts, pump and dump cycles are not mysterious. They are steps in a sequence that, when executed with discipline and secrecy, can create the illusion of value and then exploit that illusion. The moral of the story is not that charisma is bad, but that unexamined admiration can become complicity. We cheered for the spectacle and, in doing so, often sidelined the people whose lives were ruined. There are pragmatic takeaways without drifting into a how-to. Investors should be skeptical of unsolicited offers and wary of must-act-now urgings. Regulators need resources and the will to follow complex financial flows across borders. Journalists and storytellers must balance the allure of a charismatic villain with the responsibility to center victims. And viewers, us, should ask whether our appetite for high-octane tales inadvertently rewards people who profited from harm. Jordan Belfort's arc, from Queen's ice cream seller to Stratton Oakmont boss to convicted felon to memoirist and movie subject, encapsulates a larger cultural failure: the glamorization of wrongdoing when it is accompanied by spectacle. The $2 million wire that investigators traced to Switzerland, the recorded conversations, the whistleblowers who broke ranks, these are the forensic details that dismantled the myth. The $110 million restitution order and the 22-month sentence are the legal bookends. But legal penalties and cinematic renditions do not automatically restore what victims lost. In the end, the question is not just what Belfort did, but how we responded. Did we learn to spot manufactured value, or did we learn only to admire the performance? Do we make space for restitution and reform, or do we recycle scandal into entertainment and applause? Tell us what you think. Do we reward charm over accountability? If you found this breakdown useful, like and share, and leave a comment. Whose story do you think got lost in the spectacle? Share this with someone who cares about financial fairness. And let's keep the conversation focused on the victims, not the glamour.